Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something absolutely revolutionary. We're unpacking Griffin's Cognitive Ecology model, or CEM. For decades, traditional frameworks have viewed neurodivergence, like autism or ADHD, through this super rigid lens of internal deficits. But the CEM, it completely flips that script. It challenges us to stop looking at the person in isolation and instead look at the incredibly complex relationship between a person's brain, their body, and their environment. It's a total game changer.
Okay, let's dive into this. If you're neurodivergent yourself, or if you love, work with, or support someone who is, you've probably encountered a deeply confusing reality. I mean, why on earth might a neurodivergent person be a brilliant, articulate speaker on a Tuesday, but find themselves completely nonverbal or unable to execute basic tasks by Thursday? Traditional models would just slap a label on that: inconsistent, unreliable, or even lazy. But, as we're going to see today, that interpretation completely misses the reality of how neurodivergent cognition actually works.
To really understand layer 1 of this model, think of this agenda as a topographical map of the terrain we're about to explore. We'll hit 5 landmarks: the Inconsistency Paradox, cognition as an emergent process, the energy budget model, the hidden cost of masking, and finally, designing for environmental fit.
All right, landmark number 1. The Inconsistency Paradox. Let's get into why this fluctuating performance causes so much confusion and, frankly, shame.
Same person, same brain, entirely different performance. I absolutely love this quote from the source material because it perfectly validates the lived experience of so many neurodivergent individuals. Especially for late-diagnosed folks, abilities can seem to shift drastically day by day. Deficit-based models pathologize this, right? You get asked things like, well, if you could do it yesterday, why can't you do it today? Which completely ignores the reality of the situation and just heaps all the blame onto the individual.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference. The old deficit-based view just assumes that inconsistency equals unreliability, full stop. But the CEM perspective radically shifts this. It says cognitive shifts are relational, not defects. What we're calling inconsistency is actually a direct ecological response to surrounding conditions. It's a reaction to a total misalignment between a person's cognitive style and their immediate environment. It's not a malfunction, it is an adaptation.
Which brings us nicely to section 2, cognition as an emergent process. This is where we solve the paradox by looking at how cognition actually functions under layer 1 of the CM.
This definition right here changes everything. Cognition is an emergent process. It is not a fixed internal trait locked inside your head like a machine with static broken gears. Actually, human cognition is dynamic and fluid. It's what Griffin calls our embodied and cognitive ecology. Think of it like the interconnected root system of a plant. How well that plant thrives, how it processes nutrients, that is in constant dynamic dialogue with the soil, the sunlight, and the water it receives. Autistic cognition works the exact same way. It fluctuates depending on sensory input, social expectations, and structural demands.
Let's put that into perspective. Picture a traditional workplace. Open office plan, harsh fluorescent lighting, constant social ambiguity. For a neurodivergent brain, the cognitive impact is often sensory overload or even a complete verbal shutdown. The person looks disengaged. But take that exact same person with the exact same brain and put them into a self-directed space. Predictable structure, soft lighting, autonomy over their movement. Suddenly the outcome is deep focus, sustained attention, and analytical clarity. The brain didn't change, the environment did, and so the cognitive expression emerged entirely differently.
Moving right along to section 3, the energy budget model. Because navigating these misaligned environments comes at a really heavy, invisible cost.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visualizes a very abstract concept. Autistic cognition operates on an energy budget. In a misaligned environment, watch how fast this battery drains. A massive 45% of their energy goes purely toward managing sensory overwhelm. Another 45% is eaten up by masking, just trying to translate natural behaviors into neuronormative expectations. Do the math, and that leaves a literal sliver, just 10% of their cognitive budget for actual task execution, thinking, or communicating. It's absolutely wild when you see it laid out like that. No wonder it's exhausting. And when that energy budget is drained down to zero, day after day, well, you hit a wall. When cognitive load exceeds capacity, the result is burnout, shutdown, or regression. And here's the kicker. Burnout is not an individual failing. It's not a lack of resilience. In the Cognitive Ecology model, burnout is a threshold phenomenon. It is the systemic, inevitable outcome of continuously exceeding your cognitive and sensory limits in an environment that demands you conform but refuses to provide meaningful support.
That leads us straight into Section 4, the hidden cost of masking. This is arguably the most exhausting drain on that energy budget we just talked about.
I wasn't broken. I was misrecognized by systems that weren't built to see me. That is such a poignant way to put it. Masking, which is the suppression of your natural cognitive, sensory, and communication patterns just to appear neurotypical, is often treated like it's a neat social skill. But for many neurodivergent folks, it is absolutely not a choice. It's a grueling, desperate survival strategy in exclusionary spaces. You're adapting to a system that refuses to adapt to you.
Traditionally, we're told masking is just a handy coping mechanism to blend in, but the CEM perspective exposes the reality. Masking is a forced neuroadaptive strategy, and it is entirely caused by systemic misfit. It's an institutional demand. People are masking to avoid social rejection, to avoid getting fired, or to avoid being medically invalidated.
So the crucial point is that this survival strategy carries a massive, devastating toll. When your neurodivergent traits are constantly invalidated, the pressure to mask goes into overdrive, leading to severe long-term costs. We're talking chronic cognitive exhaustion and executive drain. We're talking the literal erosion of your identity, where you start to forget who you actually are. It leads to delayed diagnosis, especially for marginalized groups who are pressured to mask even harder, and ultimately it ends in autistic burnout and full physical collapse.
Let's pivot to our final stop, Section 5, Designing for Environmental Fit. We need to stop fixing the individual and start redesigning the environment.
This right here is the absolute core takeaway of Layer 1. Read it with me. If cognition is ecological, then support must be environmental. We absolutely have to stop trying to train autistic individuals to just endure spaces that demand neuronormative performance. Instead, we need to intentionally design relational spaces, environments where their natural cognitive rhythms aren't just safe, but are actually valued and can truly thrive.
Let's move to this and see how this builds into clear, actionable interventions for places like schools and offices. Instead of telling someone to just deal with blinding fluorescent lights, give them adjustable, soft lighting. Instead of forcing them to endure noise overload, provide a quiet workspace or noise-canceling tools. And this is huge. Replace rigid, archaic workflows with flexible work sprints and asynchronous communication. It drastically reduces processing fatigue.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What would our systems actually look like if we designed them for cognitive diversity from the very beginning? Not as an afterthought, not as some special accommodation we grudgingly hand out, but as the foundational blueprint of ecosystem design. True support is not about retrofitting a broken system, it's about building systems rooted in true belonging, where every type of mind has the exact environment it needs to flourish. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you look at the environments around you.